Welcome to the 128th season of the Canadian Club Toronto, Canada's Podium. For over a century, this platform has been a gathering place for visionaries, public figures, and decision makers to discuss the most pressing issues of our time.
We've been having important discussions and debates around this podium in this country for well over a century. I call this a historic podium of record.
Our club's always been a forum for visionaries, public figures, and decision makers to command attention to the issues of our time.
The Canadian Club is one of the most important podiums anywhere in the world that a Canadian can speak to, tell Canadians what it is that they think, develop those thoughts. And so I want to thank you for that very, very much.
Please join me in thanking our esteemed panelists today.
Through our programs and events, including our youth and young leaders programs, our diversity partnerships, our joint events, and our media and social media opportunities, we offer you access to dynamic political, social, and business figures from abroad and right here at home.
The platform from which the eloquence of Canada has flowed all of that time, whether it be business, education, politics, sports, arts, and culture. If someone wants to say something to Canadians about this country and about the future of this country, this is the venue you choose.
Hello again, everyone. I hope everyone had a lovely lunch and an opportunity to have some great conversations with your neighbors. And very much welcome to our online viewers. My name is Paula Allen. I'm a director at the Canadian Club and happy to be your host for today. Our club, the Canadian Club, seeks out partnerships to address the issues of concerns. We provide a voice to topics of interest and impact to all of us. Whether it's trade, tariffs, whatever in the economy, or whatever impacts us not only in the economy, but our lives day to day, such as diversity, equity, inclusion, and the soul of our society. These issues have significant impact on everyone. And some of those experiences are very deeply felt, in particular by Black leaders. We are pleased to amplify the diversity, equity, and inclusion conversation today in partnership with the Diversity Institute at the Ted Rogers School of Management at Toronto Metropolitan University, with an open and honest dialogue at Canada's Podium. Our ability to offer these critical discussions is due to the support of all of you, our partners and our sponsors as well. Today's event is generously sponsored by TD Bank, and we very much appreciate your support. We are also very grateful that the Canadian Bankers Association is our season sponsor, and Air Canada is our official airline and travel sponsor. Canada's Forest Trust Corporation is our smart forest planting partner for the third season in a row, contributing to Canada's ecosystem. And we very warmly welcome the students from TMU's DEAS, a public policy and leadership think tank. Thank you for joining us today. Now, before I introduce the panelists, let me share some Canadian Club information with you. I invite you all to visit our website at canadianclub.org. If you're not already a member, I encourage you to get the benefit of the different types of memberships that we have. There's also information on upcoming events and our on-demand event feature. I also encourage you to share information about today's topic in your favorite social media platform so we can amplify the conversation. This topic is sure to elicit a lot of thoughts, a lot of emotions, and a lot of questions. So please take a moment, and if you're in the room, fill out your QA cards with your questions, your comments. We really want to make sure that we have a larger voice in conversation here, and our team will be collecting them and giving them to our moderator. And for those joining remotely, please hit the red Q&A button on the right side of your screen, and that will open up you to the floor for questions. At this point, I'd like to invite the Honourable Marci Ien, Canada's Minister of Women, Gender Equality and Youth. And we are honoured to have her join us today, and she'll start by making a few remarks and help set the stage for today's conversation before we dive into our panel discussion. Following that, the panel will take the stage, and the panel will include Dexter John, CEO of Sodali and Company, Canada, who's the former president and CEO of Griffin Advisors. Dexter led a team in that role of governance and financial experts. He holds an ICD.D designation and is the director of Origam Incorporated and Prosper Gold Corporation. Previously, he was the chairman and board member for Partners Real Estate Investment Trust, and as of March 1st, he will become the Chief Executive Officer of Financial Services Regulatory Authority of Ontario. We also have Charlene Theodore. Charlene is the Chief Inclusion Officer of McCarthy Tétrault. She drives diversity, inclusion, and corporate social responsibility at McCarthy Tétrault, leading the award-winning Inclusion Now program. In 2002, she joined the Independent Advisory Board for the Supreme Court of Canada, judicial appointments. She's also a member of and former director of the Canadian Bankers Association, the Association Yeah, this is how we help each other. She is the director of the Canadian Association of Black Lawyers and the first Black president of the Ontario Bar Association. I was not going to get that wrong. There you go. Tamara Thermitus is visiting scholar of McGill Center of Human Rights and Legal Pluralism. She's an award-winning lawyer and Bolton Senior Fellow at McGill. Tamara has served as the president of the Quebec Human Rights Commission and chief negotiator for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's mandate. She has chaired multiple committees on discrimination and equality in the legal profession. Jody Butts is a partner at Watson Advisors. Jody leads governance reviews, board evaluations, and director searches at Watson Advisors. Her governance expertise comes from her experience as a lawyer, CEO, senior executive, and director across public, private, and non-profit sectors. So an amazing panel, but let us start with giving the floor to Minister Ien. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Bonjour. It's good to see you. Paula, thank you so much for that warm introduction. To my table mates, so impressive, beyond impressive. A huge thank you to the Canadian Club Toronto and, of course, my alma mater at Toronto Metropolitan University. Thank you for creating, a lot of TMU people in the house. Thank you for creating this space for such an important conversation. I cannot wait to hear from the panel, so I won't take very long at all. As we gather during Black History Month, this conversation takes on even greater meaning because representing isn't just about what is happening today, it's about ensuring that those who come next have greater opportunities. And when I say that, I speak from experience. I was born just a few blocks down the way in St. Jamestown. I was raised in Scarborough, both diverse, strong communities, but I have to tell you, I rarely saw people who looked like me in positions of power, positions of leadership. whether it was in boardrooms or in government or on television. When I became a journalist, I understood just how much representation matters. I was a first many times in my career, one of a few Black women delivering news to Canadians across the country, and I knew that just being seen wasn't enough, not nearly enough. I had to make sure that others had the chance to step forward too. I had to be what I didn't have, so I mentored. Pour moi, c'était une priorité toujours. Mentorship, so important, beyond important. Today, when I turn on the television or I scroll through social media, I see many of the young people that I once mentored, and they're in a good space. They are leading stories, they're shaping conversations, they're changing narratives. That's tangible. That's the tangible impact of representation. It expands what is possible, not just for one, but for all of us. Yet we're at a moment where the value of diversity is being questioned in a big way, where some want to roll back progress and pretend that good governance can exist without inclusion. But we know better. We know that diversity in leadership is not a box to check. It's a competitive advantage. It strengthens institutions. It drives innovation. It builds trust. When governance reflects the real world, when leaders bring different lived experiences to the table, decisions are better and our society grows stronger. Il ne s'agit pas seulement d'opportunités pour certaines, mais d'un avenir meilleur pour tous. And so the question isn't, does representation matter? The question is why it does and what do we do about it? What do we do with it? And that responsibility doesn't fall on Black leaders alone. It falls on all of us. It falls on executives who use their positions to uplift diverse voices. It falls on organizations that move beyond performative gestures and commit to real structural change. It falls on allies who just don't say they support equity, but show it. I'm talking active allyship, because change doesn't happen when we ask for permission. It happens when those with power and influence decide to make space. It's a decision. It's why our government is committed to action through things like the Black Entrepreneurship Program. We're investing in Black-led businesses. Through Canada's 50-30 Challenge, we're working to increase diversity on corporate boards. Through direct partnerships with Black-led organizations, we're ensuring that leadership tables aren't just diverse, but they are meaningfully inclusive. Because this isn't just about representation, it is about real power and ensuring that Black Canadians and all underrepresented communities aren't just in the room, but they are shaping decisions that impact their lives. Because representation isn't symbolic, it's substantive. It shapes who gets hired, who gets funded, whose ideas are heard, whose communities are prioritized. And if this room, this incredibly diverse and talented room, proves anything, it's that when leadership is inclusive, when opportunity is shared, when voices are amplified, we all benefit. C'est notre responsabilité collective. And if there's one thing I know, it's this. When we make space for diverse leaders to rise, when we make real space for them to rise, we don't just change policies, we change possibilities. Thank you so much. Merci beaucoup. And to the panel now, and Paula.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Minister Ien. That was fantastic, and what a great setup for this conversation. I'll just tell you the preparation for this conversation was so much fun. So I'm just going to get like right to it, and I'm going to ask Charlene to kick us off, and I'm just going to ask you the question. It's the number one question I'm being asked right now by boards, by directors, by concerned people. Are you worried? Are you seeing what's happening in the United States south of the border? And are you worried about what's going to happen to boards, executives, and the importance of diversity?
So the short answer is no. Part of that is, I think, because of my approach to this work. I'm a lawyer, and I came into doing what is really DEI culture strategy because I was a workplace lawyer. I started my career doing international human rights law, then I got an opportunity to do some international commercial work, came back to Canada, and so everything regarding workplaces is kind of where I reside. And so a couple differences, you know, our countries have just, you know, different constitutional structures and makeups, right? And so there are certain things that, especially in the academic space in the States, have actually been outlawed. It would take the burning, I think, of our Constitution to have that happen in Canada. We're far away from there. But in terms of the sentiment, I'm not worried only because, you know, since 2020, if you just look at 2020 to 2024, I don't know if you can think of another 4-year period in modern history where you've had this much rapid change when it comes to not just DEI, but issues with regards to race, gender, and what's actually making it from our communities and our dining room tables into the boardroom table. And so whenever things like that happen, there is a reaction, but that has never stopped anybody in history, including myself, from just doing the work. What I am worried about is some of the inertia that I'm seeing around, well, we're not sure what's gonna happen, you know, what if this happens, the what ifs, when there is clearly work right in front of us.
Charlene, thank you so much for that. Tamara, I have to feel, given all the important roles that you've held and that you hold, what's your perspective on this question? How are you feeling right now?
I feel optimistic, but also worried. And for the simple reason that we are sleeping with an elephant. And that this elephant is currently in every room, like it done, not only in Canada, but all over the world. So why, and I'm optimistic because, as Charlene has said, we have done it before and we will still continue to do it. And, you know, the research is there to say that, you know, diversity and inclusion is not an option. It's a good governance. It's, as the minister has said, it's about innovation. It's about like inclusion, and not inclusion like a facade inclusion, but inclusion bringing people at the table and having the real conversation, meaning sometimes difficult conversation. But, you know, at the end of the game, we're like all winning. And we have to remember that. And I'm also optimistic because I saw, but there's some people speaking out in the States. There was like 16 attorney general who spoke saying that, you know, the decision of the president of the state, of the United States, is binding to the government and not to corporation. I'm also optimistic because we saw that Costco and Apple said yes, but no. And I'm also optimistic because Walmart said no for diversity, but the shareholders said no. And so that's a lesson that we should learn. The shareholders said no. So we have power, we have to use that power, and we have to convince, and we don't have to be shy, because there's no way, it's not the time to be shy. You know, if we don't speak, something is gonna happen, and we have to stay our ground. Is that the point in English?
Yes.
Yeah, in English, that's what we have to say. Me, I'm like, you know, the fight is there. We're gonna make it. We have the tool to make it. And you know what? If we're Black people in the room, it's not by mere chance, because we have to go against so many obstacles. So the fact is that we used to fight, and we have the tool to fight, and we have allied, because in the room there's also some ally. So we have to take that and say, you know, listen, and I have a quote about history, and I think history is very important because we learn from history. And now it's the time to read back what we learned and to apply the lesson because education is key, and it will still be key, and we don't value on education to make good governance. Because as you said, the guy on the other side said, you know, I love the uneducated. Me, I'm curious, so I love learning. And I guess that we have like in a kind of a university setting. So learning is like, and history is a so beautiful tool. I've done my law school, but before that, I've done like my sciences pure, on dit en français. I've done some science. But history was always a passion. I didn't know why. But by getting older, it brings you some critical analysis and critical approach that you can understand what's going on in the world. So go back, read history, and sharpen your pens.
All right, we've all been told. We've got our words. Thank you so much for that. And I just want to pick up on something you both kind of mentioned. So, you know, good governance, shareholders insisting. Let's get underneath that just a little bit more. Dexter, I'm going to invite you to jump in on this. Let's talk about, so sometimes having diverse boards is framed as a moral imperative, but what is the return on that? What is the business case? What makes it good governance?
It's a great question. I think the best way to look at it is that you have diversity of thought. I mean, truth be told, you look at all the previous boards, you look at history, as you were saying, they were mostly white men. And I remember in 2010, I wrote a paper, it was called Too Male, Too Pale, Too Stale. And it dealt with that before, just after the meltdown in the mortgage industry, whereby we were looking at other countries, and you're seeing that in Europe, where you had diverse boards, the numbers shown that within 2 years of that board being in place, the total shareholder return increased, market cap increased, and there was positivity. Now, people could argue and say that was just coincidence based on the time, but the facts are what the facts are. Whereas you have boards that do not have that kind of diversity, you're not seeing that. And again, it's the same train of thought. As you know, I advise boards for a living, and I can just tell you, you guys, I'm glad to hear you're optimistic. I am too, but I am nervous. I mean, end of the day, shareholders do have the final word, but we still have a mentality on boards that don't like change. I mean, yesterday I was in a conversation with a senior person, just to go off the line for a second, who was telling me he's a partner at PwC, and he had to step off all these boards, and now, being a white male in his early 60s, he cannot find, he's in the US, by the way, he cannot find any boards. And I just sat there and said, well, actually, you're back in the runnings now, buddy. Right? Your stock is hot now because of what's going on in the US. So you're back at the game. So the point being is that it's being felt across the board, but if you don't do this, and we don't keep on top of the history, we're going to just repeat ourselves.
Charlene, did you want to jump in on this?
Yeah, I understand the worry and the concern. Look, I'm a lawyer, right? A good friend of mine once said, as a white guy, he comes from like a long line of lawyers, and he said, my great-grandfather could rise from the grave today, walk into a downtown Bay Street law firm, and aside from like, what are these cell phone things would pretty much look the same, right? And so I know about industries that are resistant to change. And I know that there are still attitudes about what's happening now, what's happened over the past 4 years. I'm not trying to invalidate something very real that's going on. That being said, when all of this was happening, where I thought we would land is kind of where we are now with the power of choice, right? When I came out of law school, when I was a teenager in high school, trying to find a job, right? You knew there were certain places that just did not hire Black teenagers, right? You did not have a lot of options. Coming out of law school, there were just certain firms that that's just not something that we do. Whether you're looking for a job or you're looking to where to spend your dollars, right? As Tamara and you just illustrated, there's the power of choice, right? And so people are allowed to be upset about what's happening, right? Be upset about the male pale stales are allowed to be upset about the change, right? And they're allowed to run their businesses accordingly. And at the end of the day, we'll look at the balance sheet, right? As Dexter said, of those businesses versus the businesses that are really trying to get out of their own way when it comes to talent and innovation and getting the best people on their boards and in their workplaces. The other thing that I think is really important, and what particularly bothers me about the point I made earlier about inertia, we are not that far removed from the pandemic where women en masse, mostly women, but some men, caregivers, had to leave the workforce. We are not recovered from that yet, right? And so I guess my message is like, let's not take our eye off the ball, right? This is what happens. If you, again, like you said, read your history books. This is the cycle. This is what happened, you know, after Obama got elected the first time. Like, this is just what happens when there is change that I think the historically marginalized majority think is a good thing. People kick up a fuss, right? That being said, you know, beyond the case for an individual company A's balance sheet, as a country, imagine what our economy would look like if we really leaned in to the principles that we're talking about today, and we were able to bring everybody who, as a woman, was forced to leave the workplace or could not advance in their career, we were able to get everybody participating in the economy because we got out of our own way in terms of discrimination and bias when it comes to advancing and retaining and attracting top talent.
Thank you so much for that. So shifting the conversation a little bit then to the levers for change. If what we're trying to fight against is inertia, you know, let's focus on our levers. So one lever is mandatory reporting, right? And we've seen that. When we think about that, like, what is the importance? What is the extra value? What are the unique advantages when it's a rule? You have to do it. So when we think about disclosure rules, I don't know, Tamara, if you wanted to jump in on that one, but what is the relative importance of having something like a mandatory disclosure rule in terms of board composition or executives, mandatory reporting on how you go out and find those people and what and the processes that you follow?
I think that those rules could foster innovation. For example, if we look at the board members, normally we go like in the same old pools, but we have option. We can look like of people who were like in the nonprofit, who were like participating in society in the nonprofit because such and such reason, and it's also linked with the discrimination, as she said. I remember like being in the federal public service, and there was a program in 2000, and the program was to find black leaders. But you know, when you look at the mapping of the people, they were like at the middle or low level. So what the government had decided at the time, they said, you know, we're going to look at what you're doing outside the job, saying like, you know, are you a nonprofit? Where are you exerting your leadership? If you cannot exert it inside, a lot of us exert our leadership outside. So they opened that program, take 20 black person, there was 2,000 applications, 20 people were chosen. I was part of them, but that's not the story. The story is that they look at what are you doing outside to bring your leadership and bring it in. So I think that there's a way to look at society to say that, you know, yes, we discriminate some of them, but you know, they have the resiliency to continue to contribute to their community. So let's bring that leadership in and let's look at it. So we have to look at things outside the box, not like, you know, looking at the same feeder pool, but we have to look at feeder pools that are different and look at also at the experience of black people and the experience of women. For example, when I was a student, when I was a first lawyer, like for the first year in the federal government, they asked me to choose articling student, and we were looking just at marks. And I said, that's unfair. Because there's more, for example, if I have like 2 kids going to law school and having like average mark, but I'm able to manage my community, my family, and so I have the management skills that would be very useful for a lawyer to be able to manage the different priority. So when we look at this, I think that's an opportunity that we can take, like when you look at mandatory, that force people to be creative and to look at society as a whole, and also to recognize that there maybe some people have been treated differently, either women, either people with visible minority, black people, people with handicap, and say that, you know, let's bring them to the table. And, you know, we see that there's some advantage to it, but we have to try it. And resistance to change is very strong, and there's multiple reasons for that, but that's a conference on its own.
Dexter, can I invite you to jump in on this? Like data and reporting, you know, when it's, how does this help us move forward?
Well, fortunately and unfortunately, in the sense that we need this to allow for board refreshment. Unfortunately, as I said earlier, human beings generally are simple folks, right? And at the end of the day, if we don't push for change, things regress to the mean. So let's look back, 2020, we had the George Floyd incident, everything was pushed, DEI, everything was moving forward. Here we are 5 years later, and now we're seeing stuff in the US whereby they're trying to pull back, regressing back to the mean. So in a sense that what we need this for is to continue the conversation, right? We have institutions like ISS and Glass Lewis, third-party advisory firms in my world, where they have a lot of influence, a lot of power. And last week, I don't know if you saw, ISS came out and, you know, let me go back a step. 2 years ago, they had rules. You know, you have to have 30% women on boards, and they're talking about this is the year that they're going to bring in racial diversity as well. If you did not meet that criteria, they voted against your chair of the nominating committee or the chair of the board. Last week, they came out and said, because of what's going on in the U.S., that they're not going to apply that any longer. That's scary, because again, boards are who they are, and like I said, I advise many of them. And if change is not pushed upon them, it doesn't necessarily happen. Now, here we are in Canada, so far so good, but I'm hoping it stays that way. But again, the pressure. So the good thing is with the larger institutions like the BlackRocks and Fidelities, they have their own internal policies, and hopefully they have not changed their position. If they do, then we have big things to worry about. But right now, this stands. So to ultimately answer your question, which is this important? We need this. I wish we didn't, but we do.
Right, right. Well said. Thank you so much for that. Charlene, can I go to you and say, but what about voluntary codes, right? There's or voluntary pledges or these types of things. Is it a complementary role? Are there unique benefits to those approaches besides things like mandatory reporting and data?
Yeah, and I'll just pick up on what Dexter said, because what I was thinking in my head as we're having this conversation is that, you know, when we are putting mandatory rules, laws, regulations, bylaws in place, there's always a policy framework behind it, right? There's a reason why a country, you know, the thinkers in the country decide, say, look, this is how we want things structured, right? There used to be rules. We used to live in a time where there were no rules about the number of women on boards. And there was a reason why those policies were put in place. Now, I think we're in a time where Canada really has an opportunity to continue to be a leader and go even further. In some respects, we lag a little behind our US and UK counterparts in terms of collecting demographic and diversity related data, but in some areas we're the leader. We're the first country to include trans and non-binary people in our census data. And so we're at the point now where you have to be willfully blind if you want to say, well, we shouldn't have this rule, because it ultimately, I think, is just a reason to avoid having the conversation, right? There's differing opinion, but there's so much studies and literature and built up to say that, you know, these rules should be mandatory. So when it comes to voluntary, you know, commitments or guidance, they should be complementary, and I think it's a way to, I look at those things and like, look, this is how you get a competitive advantage, but they have to be complementary to something, right? So you've got to be complementary to, I think, a robust legislative and strategic framework that makes sure that our businesses have that competitive edge. So complementary, yes, but complementary to, you know, a robust framework that I think we could go a little further on.
Tamara, so mandatory reporting, voluntary pledges, are there any other levers of change we're not talking about that we should be talking about?
I think change is also linked fundamentally to what are your values, what are you valuing? And I think that we have to go back again to what are our values. And you know, data also show us why we should change. And the Diversity Institute have made some research about, like, you know, looking at why we should have like diverse board and diverse executive management teams. And it seems that, you know, data, and we need to be like more specific on our data, because it's interesting to tell a story, but a story with data is a very convincing story. And for example, talking about data, I just learned by Dabo, who is there, that the Black North Initiative will have like a voluntary pledge, just meet their like standard at 3.5% of Black people on board who sign the pledge. So what we know for sure is that law is important, business case is important, value is important, but people pushing the needle, it's fundamental. And when you sit around a table and you sign, signature must mean something. And we see that when people do it, they stick to their word and they achieve it. So, and I think that it's important to see that. And I guess also that, you know, for me, like looking at what's happening and going back to the first question, making a circle, making a circle, you know, I thought about my experience of residential school when I was negotiating, and you know, the space in 2000 was like a space where Aboriginal people did not have a voice. And you know, looking at it 23 years after, and looking at how Aboriginal people are like included more. It's not perfect, we have to work, we always have to work. But it's way better than it was before. And I think diversity, inclusion is the same thing. We have to look at what, you know, what can be achieved. And you know, there's tool to achieve things, and there's, when we decide, when the government and the people decided that, you know, we're gonna change the conversation with Aboriginal people, the conversation is currently changing. And I think that that conversation for like all inclusivity, and it's fundamental for me and for a friend of mine, because we saw the fact that our like intelligence, knowledge was not included in the mapping of Canada. And we saw the people suffering. And I'm not talking about, and we talked a lot about mental health, but the thing is that when you're not included in a society that you cherish, there's a human price to it. And that's part of the conversation for me also. We have to think those programs are not programs. There are things that to make sure that everybody can contribute in a society, that Canada is a society where immigration is important. So if we decide to take people and let them on the side, in the margin, as we say, we're losing it. And we have to remember what is our fabric, what the decision that we have made during the years bring us at this point of time. And I think that for me, and I guess for all Canadians, with data, we have to have those conversations, complicated conversations, but we have to sit down and see what are the real value of inclusion and diversity. And you know what? There's value to that. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, please.
I've been a litigator, so I speak a lot.
Okay, so what advice would you give to multinationals? So maybe you're a company sitting in Canada, but you're also have operations in the United States. What's your advice to these CEOs and to boards? Dexter, is it okay if I invite you to kick us off?
I'll give you two sets of answers. Just dealing with that, addressing that particular question, I mean, obviously the lawyer in me will say, well, if they're incorporated in Canada, we just follow Canadian rules. But ultimately, that is it's a challenge that we have not faced yet, at least I have not.
Yeah.
But I think, it's all about community. Like I always believe, you know, if you're multinational, clearly you're global, you're in other countries, and therefore your board should mirror that to an extent, right? Yeah. It should be able to have that, and whether it's diversity, racial, or gender, we need to bring that in, because again, without having that diversity of thought in the room, you're just going to have the same guys or girls just doing the same things over and over again. So from that perspective, that's how I would address it. On the other side of the coin, which is I think more important to this group right now, is that, look, we need to be pushing for refreshment on boards. And the way to do that and get that happening, we need to have people like ourselves who are interested in being on boards put your name forward, right? At the end of the day, I remember the debate last year where I said, the individual in the room was saying, well, you know, recruiting firms like yourselves and others, they should be on the corner, you know, trying to pick up people. And I'm like, well, yeah, not really. I think the other way around is that if we want something, we need to go get it. You need to put yourselves forward, put your resumes out there, because at the end of the day, like I said, I go to these boards, I'll be in the room, they're like, well, we need to get X, Y, or Z, and they'll call up a recruiting firm and say, well, this is the criteria. They'll go into their little Rolodex, and they have 4 people that fit that category. That pool is small, and then they don't choose them, and the next argument is, we do not have enough people with the experience. Reason being, because our resumes aren't there. So I would say, to make change and have change, we need to go out there, put your names forward, go to those recruiting firms, whatever else, go on the board, see the nominating chair, meet them, have that conversation, to which then you can put yourself into the mix, because it burns me when I go in these rooms and I hear, well, they don't have any experience, we don't have enough people. Well, guess what? Everyone in that board, their first board had no experience. Someone put you there. So we need opportunities, right? So that's the end.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Charlene, I mean, I'm not asking you to legally advise. I'm not asking you to wear your McCarthy.
Look, I'm happy to legally advise and bill everybody in here. That can happen.
Okay, so this whole conversation, privilege, love it.
You're asking my favorite question. Okay. I've made a few predictions in the dark times of 2020 of kind of where we would end up, and some of them have been right. So I don't have a crystal ball. But again, I see this as an opportunity for Canada to really be a leader on the world stage. Dexter's correct. You're multinational, you're operating in Canada. I don't care who signed what executive order. Our law trumps, pardon the pun, whatever country you're operating in, right? We have the Employment Equity Act. It's just a non-starter, right? But that being said, I feel like business leaders are, and I'm in conversations with CEOs and business leaders who are coming together to kind of discuss these issues, right? We're obviously focused a lot on the States, but there's a lot happening around the globe in terms of the shift towards historically marginalized people and their place in not just society, but in business, right? There's a lot of talk, not just in Canada, but globally, about the productivity problem. I don't see enough people connecting that to the fact that we need to get out of our own way, right? And stop turning down qualified, able people, stop creating conditions where women have to make really impossible choices when it comes to things like childcare and advancing or making partner, I don't see people connecting those conversations, but I think that we have a great corporate Canadian community and people wanting to do the right thing. Everyone's kind of on different parts of their journey, God bless them. But I think this is an opportunity for really Canada to play a lead role in what I think is going to have to be a global conversation, because the time we're in, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. And so I think that that's what I'm looking for. That's what I predict will happen. And I think that's what I'm looking forward to seeing over the next year or so.
Well, thank you for that. So I want to go to each of you. I'll start with you, Tamara. You mentioned history and the importance of reading history. When we think about the moment we're in and we think about the mindset of being a leader, being on a board, being a CEO, being in senior leadership teams, what experiences should boards and other leaders draw upon to meet this moment? Because we can have courage, we can draw upon our Canadian institutions and our laws and our values. But it's still going to take some courage, and from what well of experience can we draw that from?
But you have the right word, it's the time for courage. And, courage is like something that you have to foster, and it's not easy, Some decision that we'll have to make will be difficult to make. But at the same time, you have to go back what is really important. And I guess that, as a leader, that's your role, to ponder every component, and you come don't forget that you have to act with courage. And for me, courage is one philosopher said that the greatest value is courage, because without courage, you cannot do any other value does not exist. So courage is an anchor that you have to stick in. And we have, as my colleague Charlene said, we have the law. We have our infrastructure. Government just recently is doing some consultation on a regulation with respect to federally regulated finance institution, talking about diversity and inclusion. So we have those anchors. So if now we have to have the courage, and nobody said that courage was easy.
Fair, fair. Charlene, your advice.
You know, I'll start by saying this. When George Floyd was murdered, and I saw kind of the global reaction and the kind of global collective leaning in to learning that people were doing, and people were all of a sudden noticing what is just life for the rest of us. I had a hard time emotionally, because to me, I wondered, well, why George Floyd? Why not when Trayvon happened? Why not when, you know, my ex-boyfriend in high school got beat up by the police, or so many men in our communities or women in our communities are over-policed or subjected to, whether it's by the police, courts, lack of opportunity. Why was that the moment? And it took me a while to understand it, but it was the fact that people were really focused, right? And for people who do not live this experience, it took the world stopping to help them gain a little bit of insight. And it's no accident that that didn't just translate into conversations around activism or human rights. It translated to general counsel across the country, across the world. It kind of translated to CEOs across the world. So what I would say to anybody watching who is, we lovingly refer to as male, pale, or stale, is to just remember why you started this, right? Why you were compelled to say, let me look at myself, let me look at my board, let me look at the way we run our business, right? Of course it started with George Floyd, but there were other financial, you know, culture, sustainability, and risk avoidance factors to back it up. And it's been 4 years. Everyone just calm down. I know it's hard, right? I know it's hard, but, you know, if you have a bad audit one year, or you have a bad, you know, fiscal year, you don't just eliminate the role of CFO and just say, well, you know what, we're not doing taxes anymore, right? This is part of, which I would love to say. This is part of, maybe Marci, you can help me out with that. This is part and parcel of running a business, right? Traditionally, CEOs have had to have a number of tools in their tool belt, right? You've got to be a strategist, you've got to be an innovator, you've got to be a leader, you've got to be a rainmaker. If you do not have a basic understanding of what creating a profitable and sustainable workplace culture infrastructure means, if you do not understand the basics of how you can use DEI, inclusion, whatever you want to call it, as really a risk management tool, you will not succeed over the long haul.
Awesome, thank you. Dexter.
It's actually amazing. I guess I'll just answer one thing. I think why that George Floyd event was so resonating, that this man narrated his death in public.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that really means something. I would just add, in a very little to add, I thought both responses are right on point, is just that I think leaders need to understand their shareholders, their stakeholders, and their community. And if you understand that, when you're to be a leader, to understand that and be able to balance the requirements that are required in the, I need to make money for the widgets that we sell, but I have a company that works in a certain industry or a certain area, and ensuring that my consumers feel that they are a part of this. That is what a true leader is, from my perspective, and being able to maximize that and maximizing the tools at your feet and your staffing, and to empower. Really important to empower your people. Let them feel that they are a part of the solution. Then we can get the change that we're looking for. And then also, as I say, not like us. We're not like them.
History, power of choice, renewal, and refreshment. Please join me in thanking our amazing panelists. Great discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That was fun. So good.
So I don't really know what to say other than wow. Like, this was a panel for the ages with insights. Like, there's so much that I personally got from this, whether it's crystallizing things that I already knew at one level, or having some clarity on something else, like knowing your history so you can learn from your history. Using your voice. So things that are not right, like certain recruitment practices, can be corrected so you have the diversity that you need, knowing that there is no business right now, particularly in this demanding, innovative-focused environment, that will survive without diversity of thought, and you don't get diversity of thought without diversity of people. So all of this, I think, has given us some food, in addition to the food that those in the room might have had, to go forward and be stronger. So thank you very much to the panelists on behalf of the Canadian Club for this wonderful and thought-provoking conversation. Minister Ien, thank you as well for opening up this session with such heartfelt thoughts. And, you know, we had a little bit of applause from Scarborough, which is hometown as well. I mean, this is an important thing for all of us in the private sector, in the public sector, in elected government to focus on, because it's the strength of our country, and the future of Canada. Dexter, Charlene, Tamara, again, we appreciate your vivid examples of how diversity, equity, and inclusion, or equity, diversity, and inclusion, or what's right and smart, starts with good governance, and why Canadian business leaders must lead by example. And for Jody, thank you for your excellent moderation and having everything flow so beautifully. Okay. Before we close, I invite you to enjoy events and join us again for other Canadian Club events. Next Wednesday, we will be having Susanna Pierre, President and Country Chair of Shell Canada, where she'll be discussing the challenges facing our oil and gas sector. And on February 27th, we'll be hosting International Women's Day with conversations featuring Mitzi Hunter, CEO of the Canadian Women's Foundation, Tanya Von Biesen, CEO of Versify, a formerly woman in Canadian capital markets, and also the president of the Canadian Club this year. So again, thank you. I hope you enjoyed today. I hope you took something away from it. And please visit our website, canadianclub.org, for other events, and especially to become a member. Enjoy the day.